Here we go. That'll help. With Nick Caleb. Nick received his JD from the University of Oregon School of Law in 2010 and went on to graduate with an LLM from Tilburg University in the Netherlands. This is an advanced law certification with global credibility. He's active locally in Portland policymaking with particular focus on environmental justice, sustainable cities, and issues around the commons. Formerly with Oregon, Our Children's Trust, Nick helped launch the Youth Climate Action Now, the UCAN campaign. This campaign is a continuation of an effort that began in the energetic youth in Eugene who organized to persuade the Eugene City Council to pass the country's first binding climate recovery ordinance, committing city planning and policy to a science-based community-wide greenhouse gas reduction goal of 350 parts per million of CO2. He currently works as a professor at Concordia University in Portland and contracts with the Center of Sustainability Economy and 350 PDX. In the fall of 2015, he was instrumental in crafting and helping to pass Portland's first-of-a-kind fossil fuel infrastructure resolution. Thanks, Nick. And also with us is Bill Bradley. Bill served as Oregon Secretary of State, Bradbury, I'm sorry. Bill served as Oregon Secretary of State from 1999 to 2009. He previously served in the Oregon legislature from 1981 to 1995 as Senate Majority Leader from 1986 to 1993 and Senate President from 1993 till 1995. Yes. Nice. In 2010, Bill was appointed by Governor Kulongoski to the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, a 4-state compact to oversee regional energy and Columbia River salmon. He currently serves as one of the 2 Oregon representatives on this committee. Bill was also founder and executive director for The Sake of Salmon, a 3-state coalition dedicated to finding common ground for salmon restoration. Bill was one of the first 50 participants in Vice President Al Gore's climate change training session and has given more than 400 climate change presentations in Oregon. Born in Chicago, Bill has lived in Oregon since 1971, first settling in Bandon, where he owned and operated a small business. Today, Bill lives in Bandon with his wife, Katie. Thank you for joining us, Bill. And I will give the floor to you guys.
Sure. So I want to, I have to say, this movie really starts to make me cry, brings tears to my eyes. To see the effort and the commitment of people all over the world from all walks of life just really, really inspires me. I want to tell you one piece of good news and one piece of bad news. As was said in the introduction, I serve on the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, which is a very interesting 4-state effort to really basically develop to meet the electricity needs of the Northwest region, particularly through the Bonneville Power Administration. And every 5 years, we develop a new power plan to meet the needs of the region. And the most recent power plan that we just adopted literally 7 days ago basically says we will meet in this region all of our increased electric needs through conservation and a thing called demand response, which is basically finding a way to just reduce the peaks in your electricity so you don't have to build new power plants. And even Idaho voted for it. And it was truly inspirational to me to see us adopt a plan that basically says we're going to deal with the problems of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we're going to deal with problems of climate change by really reducing our use of those resources and continuing to live in a very comfortable way. So that was very inspirational to me. Another thing happened, I guess it was yesterday, the day before yesterday. Our president, President Obama, had proposed and enacted through the Environmental Protection Agency a new program called the Clean Power Plan that basically was going to really, really reduce this country's dependence on particularly old coal plants. And just before his passing away, Justice Scalia and 4 other justices on the Supreme Court took a very, very unusual step and overrode essentially a lower court and put a stay on the implementation of the Clean Power Plan until it's resolved by the Supreme Court, which is really, most legal people say this does not happen very often. So basically, the Supreme Court, by one vote, has just stopped one of the most significant things President Obama took to the Paris Climate Change Conference as an action of the United States. And the Supreme Court has now said, no, I'm not going to do that yet. So that was the bad news. And the good news was really seeing that we, in fact, can meet our electrical needs very effectively without increasing pollution. So, turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Bill. So I wanted to talk a little bit about fossil fuel export policy tonight. And for those of you who might not be aware, we're in a really interesting place right now in the Northwest. Literally, we occupy a piece of land between Southeast Asia, where emerging markets are demanding new energy that, if sort of combusted in the form of fossil fuels, is going to push us over the climate cliff for sure. I mean, but many times over. And dirty energy that's being mined either from the tar sands or from the Bakken Shale, from Wyoming in the form of coal, that has to reach those places. And so Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, we actually stand between that energy getting to market. And based on that fact, which has been discovered and talked about by economists now and by scientists, we've launched a series of campaigns to try to stop the construction of new fossil fuel infrastructure. A couple of years ago, we started talking about these ideas, and it seemed that we'd have about like 10 years before we could finally get this stuff to catch on. And somehow in 2015, we took a light speed leap forward. And in Portland, as mentioned, we were able to pass the first fossil fuel infrastructure ban in the country. And it's being implemented sort of over the next year now. So I wanted to give the abridged version maybe of how that came to be, so you have an idea sort of what the working parts might look like, as if you're in Salem or in the region here, as these issues come up, how you actually organize on the ground to be able to win those victories. So what basically happened is that the Port of Portland, which as a city of Portland we have no control over, it's state-appointed commissioners, they kind of do their own thing, we don't have any local control over it, decided to bring in a company called Pembina, who is a major investor in the Alberta tar sands, to put in a propane export terminal at the Port of Portland. It would be a $500 million investment, which would be one of the biggest, well, actually the biggest investment in Portland history. So it looked pretty attractive from that level, a business standpoint, you might say, even though the permanent jobs weren't that high. So the mayor signed on as a sort of a supporter of that project. The environmental community got hold of it, and we were horrified because propane gas is a byproduct of oil and gas extraction, and it may burn slightly cleaner than oil, but in all those processes you release a lot of methane, and so natural gas, propane are not actually clean fuels in a climate sense when you put in their entire life cycle. So we started to mobilize against it, but we didn't have any way really to say no to it. There wasn't a public process for it. And we kind of lucked out. Some planner must have forgotten that there was an obscure environmental code where there's a conservation zone between the port area where they were going to store the natural gas and where the ships would dock and they would load it. And it said you can't pipe hazardous materials across this area, and propane counted as a hazardous material. So they had to actually go to the city and ask for a zoning change, a point zoning change, in order for that to take place. And so pretty straightforward sort of amendment process, so they thought. And what we ended up doing is turning that whole entire process into a referendum on the project as a whole. And we started going into sort of like lower planning meetings, stacking them with hundreds of people, kids, tribal members, scientists, doctors, people talking about health impacts, climate justice activists, teachers, pretty much everybody who had gotten wind of this project. And we went to a series of these meetings and just like started to stack them like crazy, started to generate media. It became a big issue in Portland. They ended up voting it through anyway, kind of on a last second change of vote. We thought we had won at that stage, and somebody changed their vote right at the last second and voted it through and made a recommendation to city council that they actually approve that code change. And so rather than being dispirited though, we decided to sort of ratchet up our campaign and make it a little bit more serious. So the mayor of Portland, Charlie Hales, was the only person who was on record as supporting that. Many people assumed that he would get the additional 2 votes. We only have 5 commissioners on council. It's very strange. But they assumed that Hales would be able to get 2 more votes. And so we decided that, okay, well, if he wants to live by this project and make it his legacy, then we're going to help him in doing that. And so we began, it was right around Earth Day, luckily, so we followed him around a lot. People had signs. We wouldn't allow him to take pictures for social media without there being people with signs talking about fossil fuel Charlie, the fossil fuel mayor. And we put up posters around town saying the same thing, fossil fuel Charlie. We started campaigns. We started calling people. We had people call his office. And it only took about 2 weeks of doing that. He was going to run for re-election at the time before he just decided that he wanted nothing to do with that and actually changed and took it off of the council agenda, essentially killing the project. And so we were really excited about that. We thought maybe there was a chance that could come back, but we didn't know that the best we could do in the short term right there. Nobody put it back on the agenda, and so it was just kind of like looming there as a danger that would maybe be averted, maybe not. Right around the time that we got done with that, it was summer, and many of you may now have seen that this sort of infamous St. John's Bridge action. Another gift, just from the gods, you might say, of this Fennica oil Arctic exploration ship having to show up in Portland. And, you know, there were a few of us that were out and we're going to kayak out and try to make a demonstration of it, but didn't have much power to do much about it. And Greenpeace kind of just decided that they were going to send their most experienced and best climbers and drop off the bridge right at the same time. And so it turned into like a demo, became an actual blockade of fossil fuel infrastructure. And people were saying, wow, we can do this? We can actually like turn the ship back? Wow, what could we do if we were more organized? And people actually started blaming the governor and the mayor for sending the police in to remove that blockade. They liked the idea that Portland had found a geopolitical choke point to say no to fossil fuel infrastructure. And so suddenly, like through these actions, people were involved in this. It started to become, Portland's a fairly liberal place, but across the political spectrum, from Portland conservative to Portland radical crazy, like it became something we decided we didn't want to have a piece in this economy anymore. And so in November, the mayor and Amanda Fritz, who's a commissioner, decided that they were going to bring a resolution in front of the city council to say, actually, as a city, we declare our opposition to all fossil fuels. They're all dangerous. We've got these earthquakes coming. We can't be building this dangerous stuff in liquefaction zones. We're going to say no more to this. We're not going to build any new big infrastructure. We're going to implement this code over the next 6 months. And somehow, because of the amount of pressure that we'd been able to build, the amount of campaigns that we've been able to run, we were able to convince the council to take that step with a 5-0 vote. And mayoral candidates, Ted Wheeler's the state treasurer running for mayor. We convinced him to actually, not make that a political issue either. And so in the political sphere in Portland, right now, it's accepted across the spectrum. If you're a business candidate, if you're a grassroots candidate, it doesn't matter, that fossil fuel infrastructure is not the future of Portland anymore. And it fits into a larger context of resistance. Right across the river in Vancouver, they're considering the biggest oil terminal on the West Coast. You may have seen the state process for that. Over like 270,000 people in the area submitted oppositional comments, like shattering every single record that you can think of that's associated with that. So it's in Portland, it's in Salem, it's in Vancouver, it's in Seattle, all up throughout our region, rural communities, liberal communities, urban communities, tribal governments, everybody's pretty much uniformly opposed to this kind of stuff. And we have the possibility of being, the region that sets the entire tone for the rest of the nation and the world with how we're going to treat the fossil fuel future. So, very exciting times.
And if I know we want to get to questions, if I can just add one comment to what you just talked about. And there's another proposal in Oregon that is to export liquefied natural gas. It's what's called the Jordan Cove project. It's down in Coos Bay, and it's a proposal to export a huge amount of gas from Canada and from, I guess, eastern Wyoming and the like, a huge amount of gas out of Coos Bay, and they want to both do an export terminal and they want to do a power plant there to, it'll be the largest single power plant in the state of Oregon once it starts running, and they're going to use natural gas to run it, and they need the power to compress the gas to liquefy it so that it can go into really safe tankers. So I want you to be aware of that project as well, because it's really right in the middle of a huge fight to stop it. My wife is one of the most active members of Citizens Against LNG in Coos Bay.
Yeah, and the Jordan Cove project presents the same cooperation between sort of strange bedfellows all along where that pipeline has to go. They've got to clear-cut old-growth forest. They've got to move it through rural communities where, rural landowners and ranchers don't want big pipelines going through their areas. There's all sorts of room for local governments to stand up and people to say no to that. And they're not on great financial footing for making this thing happen. They need to get a market pretty quick, and they still have to capitalize in order to finish the project. And so the longer they can't certify these projects, it's kind of a ticking clock, right? We're running to the end of the fossil fuel era, and the longer it takes for this infrastructure to get built, the longer it's delayed. Some of these companies are falling apart, they're going bankrupt, they're not able to capitalize anymore, and the market's even saying these are bad investments for us. And so it's up to us right now to stop that from happening. Basically, by whatever means we possibly can slow this stuff down, we have to do it.
Let's go ahead and open it up to questions. And just two things. Please keep it brief so we can get as many questions as possible. And let's make sure that it is a question. And let's save statements for when we get into the lobby. Thank you.
I just want to thank you for coming. I just wanted to let people know we have a 350 chapter here in Salem. We're fighting LNG. We're, supporting the climate change bills in the legislature. We do a lot of things, and we have a table out there. If you'd like to keep in touch with us and get updates, just sign the list, and we'll send you emails. Not too often, but we'll be very informative for you. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, questions? Yes.
So my question is, I'm going to hopefully retire in 2 years, and I have the Oregon Savings Growth Plan, and I have a pension from the from Oregon. So how is this change in, investment and everything going to affect everyone's pensions?
Well, I think there's huge economic success in things like solar energy, like wind energy, like conservation. There are huge economic successes if we're smart enough to move in that direction. So I don't see a shift away from fossil fuels damaging anybody's retirement portfolio. When I retire, I will be a public employee retirement system member. I've been in the PERS system for about 35 years. So I'm aware of the importance of the pension. And I'm really quite confident that moving away from poisoning people and moving away from ruining our atmosphere is not going to be damaging to my pension.
Yeah, and even to add to that, there's a claim in the movie right towards the end that talks about just transition away from fossil fuel economy to a green economy. And, some of the organizing that we do as climate justice activists is to bring together renewable industry sector, grassroots labor organizers, climate justice folks, people in the social justice community in general, to start compiling what those plans would be like. One thing that's interesting about living in the Northwest, again, related to the quakes, is that we have a lot of crumbling infrastructure that exists already, and we need to update it just to make sure that it doesn't fall apart on its own, let alone have an earthquake come through. And disaster preparedness and climate resilience are actually turn out to be like the same exact thing. So there's a lot of public money that's potentially available to do these upgrades. There's a lot of jobs to be created in energy efficiency and building new buildings that can stand, even redoing the highways in certain ways that they actually stand. Bridges, in Portland we have tons of bridges that are all going to fall down sometime soon. And so, that's economic development, that's economic growth, and those are jobs that will exist potentially for 50 or 60 years to get all that work done. So I agree. It doesn't seem to me to be particularly dangerous to the pension system.
Bill, question for you. Back here.
Okay.
Hi. On the Jordan Cove project,
Yes.
has the state issued a fill and removal permit? And has DEQ or the EQC, the Environmental Quality Commission, do they issue a permit? Thank you.
Have they issued their permits? The answer,
For the fill and removal project.
the state has not, NOT, not issued the necessary permits yet. And recent hearings at the State Land Board, lots of people showed up and testified. All the processes are going on. My wife is very involved with all of them. But Environmental Quality Commission has still not made any final decision, and the State Land Board hasn't, or the Division of State Lands hasn't made one either.
Right. Thank you very much.
Anybody want to talk to me privately, I'll just stand here and if anybody wants to ask me specific questions about Jordan Cove and the process, I'll just stay right up here and y'all can join and we can have a question and answer period about that. It's a complex project.
Woo.
Thank you. I'm not sure who this is to be addressed to. I think to Bill. we will not achieve effective reduction of our carbon consumption until we impose at least a federal carbon tax to be redistributed back to the public. Can you tell me, are we moving in that direction? Is there a glimmer of hope? Thank you.
Yes, I do believe there's a glimmer of hope. I agree with you that the most simple way to really turn down the carbon contribution to the atmosphere is to put a real tax on carbon that is then rebated to people that pay it. So, I mean, rebated to all of us in this room, that pay it. And that would be a really great use of our tax system to really discourage something that we want to discourage. And yes, there are proposals. The one that's in the legislature right now is called the Healthy Climate Bill. I don't know the number. There's two big bills on the climate. One is pretty clearly going to pass in this short session. That's a deal that was cut between the investor-owned utilities and the environmental community. The environmental community was about to propose an initiative that would basically make Oregon coal-free and raise the renewable portfolio standard to 50%. Right now, the renewable portfolio standard for the state is 25%, which means that all of the investor-owned utilities, which is about 70% of the electricity in Oregon, has to come from, 25% of it has to come from renewable, non-major hydro sources. And their proposal, the environmental committee's proposal, was to raise the RPS to 50%, and to eliminate coal from the mix of electricity that we receive in Oregon. I don't get me started on that. The reason, no, it's very complicated because we actually share a Western grid that has at least 17 states on it, and there's electricity put on that grid that comes from coal plants in Wyoming and comes from coal plants in Montana and comes from coal plants in Utah. And some of them are owned by Pacific Power and Light, some of them aren't. And it's all in the mix. So it's always mystified me a little bit to say, okay, well, we're going to make Oregon's electricity coal-free. Good, but I sort of go, okay, how? But, anyway, but that proposal is moving forward in the legislature, and there's a second proposal called the Health and Climate Bill that I don't know if it'll move this session or wait until next session, the longer session, but that is a proposal that does really start to put a fee on carbon and redistribute it. So. Thank you. Senate Bill 1574. Yeah, no, and the only question in my mind was whether it was going to pass in this short session or whether it would be held until the longer session next year. But that's all. I mean, that's my only question about it, whether they're going to do it now or just wait.
Hey, my name is Jake. I'm a student at Willamette University. Thank you for coming here. Yeah, this is a great crowd. I feel like I'm one of the only students, though, which is a big problem. And that is actually what my question has to do with. It sounds like that during the referendum process, you generated a lot of support in the beginning. So my question is, how did you generate that support? Did you have any organizing methods? I'm finding it easy to reach out to my peers on social media, and I can generate a lot of support that way, but besides that, it just kind of goes dead. I'm trying to lead a divest movement at Willamette, and students aren't really picking up on it. So can I hear some organizing techniques?
Yeah. So by the time we got involved with the propane terminal project, we'd had some organizing that had taken place over years past, mostly direct action oriented campaigns, and we had a lot of young people in our mix because of that. And so one suggestion I have is that direct action is really interesting for young people when you actually do something that's a little bit naughty and you make a stand by doing it. People start to figure out that, oh, we're allowed to kind of do this. This is part of maybe our democratic responsibility. And that's more exciting for young people probably than just like sitting in meetings a lot of times. And so we structure our coalitions that we have a lot of young people that are willing to do that sort of work. And then we have older people and everyone in between, and we have figured out ways to work with one another so that people do the things that they want to do. Like some people want to make a lot of calls, some people want to do direct action, some people want to go and be in meetings, some people want to show up to government hearings, things like that. And you figure out, you just sort of continue to build your ranks and you make sure that you understand what people want to do and you move them to what they can do. The easiest way to organize people in my mind is that you come up with a narrative that makes sense, like a moral imperative especially, so divestment in university is very straightforward. And then you show examples of people winning that battle, and then you start to figure out, okay, if I don't have enough attention now, how do I do something that hits on what people want to see, because that will bring them out, and you just have to convince them that they can win, and everybody wants to be a winner, so is that easy enough? Yeah, I have students. I'm a college professor. I've been doing it for like 5 years. I started really young. And so I, give extra credit to my students to go and do stuff like this in the community. And that's something that probably there are professors at your university that will be similarly inclined. And so you can visit with them as well and ask, if there's going to be a thing, can you ask students to go? Can you give them credit to go? And you'll start to find that a network will kind of develop on its own. They'll figure out that you're somebody who's interested, and they'll send students to you when they have them in their classrooms as well.
Thanks both of you for being up there answering our questions. In 1977, I was a vegetarian hippie picking apples in Washington and got bored and traveled 5 miles across the Canadian border looking for a new adventure. And I ended up about 500 miles north of Calgary in this small, unknown boom town of about 5,000 called Fort McMurray. And I got a job as a fiberglass pipe insulator at the Canadian Bechtel refinery there. They provided us room and board, 3 exquisitely delicious meals a day. I had a private room. Someone came in and made my bed every day. And I was making the kind of money that's similar to what these guys talked about in the movie. At the time, I didn't see anything wrong with it at all. I was uninformed. I was simply uninformed. So my question to you is, you're preaching to the choir. You got a room full of people who probably are passionate about the environment and climate change. Obviously, mobilizing people to do something is producing some phenomenal results. But the real question for me, just for me, is how do you reach out to the people who aren't interested, don't believe it, and just keep living in that la-la land that there's nothing the matter, just satisfied with their version of the American dream? That's my question.
Well, I think the first thing is that the reality is that climate change is starting to reach into each and every one of our lives. And it used to be not too long ago that if I was sitting in a group this large, there would be 30%, 40%, sometimes 60% of the people in the room say, no, nothing going on with the climate. What are you talking about? And it's become real clear that people now recognize, not everybody, but most people now recognize that the climate is changing, and they're starting to feel some effects from it. And that's what I believe really can move people, is they're really starting to say, well, wait a minute, I don't really remember too many 58-degree days in February. I don't really quite remember that. So, maybe the climate's changing. And then later this summer, my goodness, we're going to see horrendous forest fires. And, so people are starting to get that. And if you can really get people connected to that, they really start to see the need to find ways to communicate with elected officials or communicate with their neighbors and sort of say, we got to do something about this.
Yeah, and additionally, when you work on fossil fuel infrastructure projects, for example, you can work with people that don't believe in climate change and still are worried about an exploding gas plant being put in next to their home, or don't want to see oil cars coming by that might tip over. And so there are pieces of this, because of the way that our society is so embedded in the fossil fuel economy. You can figure out things even when people are like, I'll never believe in climate change, that they'll still support your campaigns. And we've been able to do that. But it's also, even in Oregon, I'm from Klamath Falls originally, and I still have a lot of rural contacts. I've worked in Bend recently. They have a thriving climate activist community there suddenly. It's not as much of a minority position anymore. Even in rural Oregon, there was a survey that was released last year, the Oregon Values Survey, which showed that a clear majority of Oregonians, including in rural Oregon, believe in climate change to one degree. And it's just about, like, how are you approaching people? If you approach them with narratives that are unfamiliar to them and they see as sort of like foreign and scary, and they've been trained to not believe in because it's coming from a Marxist hippie or whatever, then that's one thing. But you can talk to people in myriad different ways. And so you have to figure out how people in local communities want to talk about that issue, and then you speak in those terms.
Thank you for all the things you're doing. And I wanted to just speak a minute to a couple of people that asked some questions about glimmers of hope. I happen to be in a weird position that I live in Salem, but I work in Olympia, Washington. And they've just passed a carbon tax, got enough votes to be on the ballot in Washington for carbon tax. I don't know if you knew that. And also, there's a group that's been working for over a year, going to the pension department for Washington, the equivalent of our PERS, and asking for divestment. So if people want that particular kind of issue, they have to ask for it.
There's a book by Seamus McGraw, and it's called Betting the Farm on Drought. It's an excellent book on climate change, and I recommend it to everybody here read it. It's very, very good. Very good. He's a great writer, and he's done his research.
The show that was on PBS not too long ago about the big earthquake said that there's a lot of storage facilities in the middle of the Columbia River that will topple over and create quite a bit of havoc, fires and also pollution and everything else. And I find it incredible that that was ever created out there, but our knowledge is better now. Are there any plans that you know of for improving that situation, which could be devastating on so many levels?
Well, in Portland, it's a political issue now, and as I mentioned, just with fossil fuel infrastructure being people uniformly agree that we're okay. This is the policy of Portland. We're going to move forward with it. It's similar in our disaster preparedness, and so we're going through a comprehensive plan update right now. And so safety on the river is one of the issues that's gaining a lot more attention. And there are groups like Portland Audubon who have like chemical facilities built on the river as an issue that they want to address like crazy. And so people are becoming aware of that. And we're also sort of a parallel track is that we are forming 100% renewable type proposals from the grassroots, labor and renewable energy industry groups. And those will definitely have proposals for getting that stuff out of those danger zones over a period of decades, right, as we build a renewable energy economy.
Hey. I'm starting to read Naomi Klein's book, and that's one of the reasons I came to see the documentary. And we can agree that the bottom line of her argument is this, the relationship, the strong relationship that there is between the economic system prevailing in the first world and climate change. So I would ask both of you, because one of you, I think it was Bill, mentioned about the sacrifices that we would probably have to do reducing our electricity use and other resources based on fossil fuel. And as well, many countries would have to do that effort too, the industrial countries, basically the first world. What do you see the possibility that, what are the sacrifices involved for we Americans in this country for being aware that we can still be a privileged society, but at the same time, if we accommodate our expectations and and we can reduce our consumption of energy so that we can accommodate our goals for a much more fair distribution of wealth, because that's precisely the bottom line again, climate change and corporate state. So I would like your comments about it, please. Thank you.
So I tend to agree maybe even more strongly than Naomi Klein does about the fact that climate change is a large economic issue, and in general that's just infeasible even outside of climate change that we can continue the rate of development that we're doing in the world right now with regard to all the other natural systems that are not strictly related to climate change. And so I've identified as a socialist for quite some time, and I think entirely about restructuring of economy when I think about environmental issues. And so in a city like Portland, there's rapid development that's taking place already. Housing prices are going through the roof. People are getting kicked out of the city because they can't afford to keep up with the wealth that's coming into the city. And so at the same time that we're talking about environmental issues related to that, we're talking about public housing, treating housing as a utility, like things that in my generation haven't been accepted as realistic opportunities. We're starting to insert that narrative and see where it can catch hold. What that will mean in terms of economic growth, well, we've decoupled our economic growth finally from fossil fuels in areas like Portland, where we've been successful at reducing emissions. We've still had tremendous amounts of growth. There's countries that are starting to do that, places like Denmark that have produced 100% renewable energy for their entire country for days at a time and have actually exported energy. They still have a thriving market economy. And so we didn't know that we could do that for a while. We thought that maybe fossil fuel economy was always going to be tied to economic growth, and it's not anymore. So at least there's some hope that you could engineer a completely different type of economy and still have economic growth that doesn't cause us to entirely abandon what we're going to do. But if we don't start changing, then we're not going to have the choice to transition, I think is what it's going to be. We'll have another financial collapse or something like that, and that'll force our hand very quickly. So the investments, making those investments intentional and immediate is of vital importance, in my opinion.
Yeah, I really agree with what you just said in terms of it's vital that we make these investments immediately. I really think that it's not like we're faced, it's a little scary what we're faced with, but it's not like we're faced with just going back into a cave in the dark or keeping burning fossil fuels. Actually, I would say all you need to do is go to Beijing, China once, and you'd say, oh, I've made it to the cave. Because that's the reality. That's the reality of just carrying on with fossil fuels. It's mind-boggling, and what gives me hope is that China is now the largest producer of solar panels in the world. They're the largest producer of solar panels in the world, followed very closely by Germany, that has a climate very much like Oregon. In fact, it has it a little bit cloudier than Oregon is. But to me, there's this incredible opportunity in this challenge. And that's what really keeps me going day after day, is that there's an incredible opportunity in this huge challenge that we face. And I see enough really exciting things. Never mind the Supreme Court for a minute. I see enough exciting things to just really stay excited that yes, we can do this. And it's not just some bleak future. We have a bright future if we get smart and move in the correct directions.
What about the methane produced by raising of animals?
Yeah, I was waiting for an opportunity to talk about that. But yeah, diet is another way, that lifestyle is probably going to change. And generationally, it already is starting to change. Younger people are less likely to eat as much meat as older generations are. But animal agriculture is a huge issue. When we were doing our climate action plan update in Portland, our city planners came up with some statistics that said that eating grass-fed, free-range beef grown 5 miles outside of Portland is more carbon intensive than getting your soybeans from South America or something like that, including all of the travel across the world, including all of the pesticides that go into it, including everything, even potentially like deforestation costs associated with growing crops in developing nations and stuff like that. So it's extremely carbon intensive, and chemically, methane is somewhere between like 25 and 80%, depending on where it's at and how long it's been in the atmosphere and what piece of the atmosphere it's in, more intensive than carbon dioxide. So a lot of the fight that we'll get into pretty soon, I don't know if that's thing that people want to hear very much, is that diet is a huge climate issue as well. I know Eugene is expecting in coming years, as they're updating their new sort of like local climate laws, to be talking a lot more about diet and what foods are produced in their city.
I have a question that runs along the same lines. I'm originally from Texas, and I've seen things go on over there that just just break your heart. But I noticed over in California they had that methane. I think it was methane leak, wasn't it?
Still going.
And what? No, I thought I heard them say they plugged it a couple of nights ago or something.
Oh, today.
Oh, was it? Oh, okay. Yeah. What type of glasses did they use to be able to see that methane? I know it's not visible, just from looking at it. It was infrared. Is that correct?
I'm not sure.
You're not. Somebody.
I mean, I know that they didn't notice it for a long time until people and animals started getting sick, and they're sort of like, "What's happening?" and eventually located the source. But
Well,
I'm not sure how they
it got me to thinking. I was in the oil business for several years, and I've seen guys go and drill wells, and when the driller was finished with the well, he'd say, we got to plug that, and he'd go over there and take a couple of 6, maybe 8 bags of the mix that they use when they're drilling, stuff it down the hole, throw 4 or 5 shovelfuls of dirt on top of it, and you're out of there, and they're all over that state. I mean, everywhere. I know when I lived there, my house would I think it was like June through October, the door wouldn't open on this side, and then then a month it would be perfect, and then we'd go back the other way on our houses. And I noticed the other day they had a 5.1 magnitude earthquake, and I'm sure that's probably has something to do with pulling fossil fuel out of the ground. But you've answered my You've answered my question. I appreciate it. Basically, I was wondering if you took a pair of those glasses and went over to the Railroad Commission in Texas and said, "Hey, let me go out here and start looking at these holes, and just see how much methane was going into the atmosphere." That might create an entire industry right there. I mean, you might have to just turn around and hire as many people as possible to be able to go around and try to take care of some of these holes that are in over there, you know?
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and the gas industry almost across the board is like, oh yeah, we figured out it was an issue finally, but we're fixing it, don't worry. And it's kind of the way that people are talking about it. But I mean, people have these experiences all the time. It's a very deregulated industry. A lot of this infrastructure is very old, like which was in California right now. And so who knows how much of this stuff is leaking, exactly what we're talking about. And I actually agree. I mean, those are opportunities economically to hire people to go actually figure this stuff out. And we should be exploring that and putting public money into it because it's going to be better for us in the future.
All right, we just have time for one more question, so here we go.
Thank you both for coming. This has been very enlightening and food for hope. At any rate, it was reported today there's been a consortium of 17 states that came together on some kind of climate change control program. Both Oregon and Washington were included. I'm wondering if you know the extent of geographically, 17 states, if it's all in the West or if it's across the country. It said there are actually some this was signed by the governors of 17 states, some Republicans included, so I'm wondering if they'll be kicked out of the party.
So I didn't. So tell me again. So 17 states signed some kind of an agreement.
Exactly right. I know there's been the West Coast Consortium that's gone on for some time between California, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia. Yeah. Apparently another arrangement including that involves 17 states. And NPR reported it, spoke about it today. They did not indicate, except for the states on the West Coast, which other states were involved. I'm not sure if it's everything west of some particular spot or if they're across the country, but it's an agreement about controlling carbon. I'm wondering if it goes past what Oregon had talked about before, or perhaps what they were proposing already qualified them for this agreement, but I just wondered if you knew anything more about it. Apparently you didn't hear that news.
No,
it was only today I heard this, brand new.
I know nothing about that. I didn't hear that today, so.
Yeah, my sense would be that if there was 17 states in the West that were agreeing to something, it may be better than nothing, but it probably won't be the most aggressive plan. Is my instinct, but I could be wrong.
Can I ask you just one quick one? Are they doing anything for air quality to stop burning in the state of Oregon?
Well, if you may not know this, but our air quality regime is quite ineffective at regulating air pollution in general. And we're learning that actually in Portland right now. We have a glass manufacturing facility in southeast Portland that's been polluting with cadmium and arsenic and chromium, and people are, horrified. And I've had the, probably displeasure of knowing about this stuff for a long time by virtue of the job that I have and having to study this kind of stuff. But air quality in the state, in Portland, it's terrible. It's quite bad in a lot of different areas, and our air pollution regulations are outdated anyway. So I'm hoping in the next year, probably the next legislative session, that we'll have a big coalition statewide that will come into the state and say enough of this. DEQ makes like 60% of their budget comes from permitting pollution. So they actually have a conflict of interest that's built into funding their own organization. And so, part of it's maybe bureaucratic, mess or something like that, but it's also been designed to fail by the legislature for a long time.
All right, unfortunately, we're out of time. Let's thank our speakers again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick and Bill. And thanks to all of you for joining us, and don't forget to catch us next month for White Like Me. Thanks a lot.